Let's talk about the Vikings rookie situation. The Vikings did not have a very good rookie class last year, other than a few players here and there. But this year, it does not look like it's much better, honestly, just based on performance or lack thereof in some cases. In some cases, there's not been much to say at all because there's just been injuries. So let's start with the first round. Lewis Seen, unfortunate injury in London, obviously. So not a great not a great sample size for us to know if he's going to be a good player or a bust or whatever. But the fact that he wasn't on the field the first several weeks of the season, didn't get much playing time, kind of leads you to believe there was maybe a struggle with him picking up the defense. So maybe there was a struggle there as well. So that, to be determined on him, I guess. But again, Kyle Hamilton was available there in that first round, and you guys, again, going back to that trade with Detroit, give him Jamison Williams for basically nothing. I mean, that was just to me still a head scratcher of a trade. But yeah, I guess it's still to be determined, though, on Lewis Seen. I know we were pretty high on him coming out. And same with Andrew Booth Jr. Like, we knew the injury issues, but we also thought that if he could overcome those injury issues, he had a good career in college, or at least a pretty solid one. And even though he's out for the rest of the season, he didn't look good. I mean, let's just be frank about it. He didn't look good these last few weeks when he was able to play. And then again, he was hurt before that and then finally got healthy, and now he's hurt again. So again, another one of those situations where the Vikings took a risk. They knew that the injury situation could be a problem, but they also wanted to take that risk because they thought that he could be a solid corner in this league, which maybe he still could, but early returns are not looking good, and obviously unfortunate that the Vikings' top two picks of the season are now going to miss the rest of the year with Lewis Seen and Andrew Booth Jr. But I guess, what are your thoughts on those first two picks so far?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you already touched on most of it. The Seen injury is big because we have no report card on him. We don't know how good he's going to be, bad he's going to be, or could be. We just don't know. So that's going to be a wait and see. It's just an unfortunate thing when injuries happen, and especially in a rookie season like that. Reminded me a little bit of when Greenway went down with an ACL his rookie year. And Lord knows I'd love if he turned into the caliber player Greenway ended up being. But we all felt the same at that point. I know, Carson, you're maybe a little young for that, but I remember for myself, we were obviously, jury's out with a lot of these draft picks. You don't know how they're going to be. And I remember, again, that situation where I'm like, well, I guess we'll just kind of see next year. And certainly that particular instance went just fine, and Greenway turned into a heck of a player. So I'm not going to sell him short on anything. It's just unfortunate we don't get to see more from Seen this year. And then obviously Booth going down. I don't want to say similarly because we got to see a little bit of Booth. I think he'll have some things to build on for next year, which I think bodes very well for him. And with corners in the NFL, I just don't think I'm ready to sell on him. Almost every single corner, even the best corners, typically struggle for a year or two, and really it's that third year you're hoping to see them settle in. So unfortunate again with the injuries, but I think he's in a better position than Seen, even though Booth had some struggles, but it's to be expected with a rookie corner.
Yeah, that is a good point. Even though I will say, like, a guy for Seattle who's having a phenomenal rookie season, Tariq Woolen, who is just a super fast dude for one, and that probably helps him even if he is not great in coverage because he can just recover and be next to the receiver in no time at all, basically. But I think I think there was definitely some other picks they could have gone with, and obviously we won't know. Again, it's early, so again, but it is just interesting to think about it a little bit. And then you go to the other second round pick in Ed Ingram, and obviously he's been a starter pretty much from day one for the Vikings, and he's been very below average for the Vikings this year. I think there's still optimism, though, surrounding Ed Ingram that he could develop into a really solid right guard because of what he did in college. He was solid, part of those LSU championship runs, I believe, with Joe Burrow in there as well. And Justin Jefferson, I believe, a teammate of his at one point. So, um, yeah, I think Ed Ingram's got some hope. But again, it's just been so bad this year that you got to wonder if he's going to be able to figure it out or not. And maybe he needs a different offensive line coach. I don't know. But and then Brian Asamoah, we haven't seen much of. We haven't seen much of him, partly because you have two veterans in Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks. But at the same time, as poorly as they have played, particularly in coverage, we've talked about it at length multiple times, Tony, how bad they've been in coverage at the linebacker spot. And of course, we know what Chandon Sullivan, he's not been good in coverage at the corner spot. So I just want to see more Brian Asamoah in those coverage situations because honestly, my whole thing is it can't get much worse than what we've seen from these cover linebackers for the Vikings so far. And now I know it's maybe harder to try and mix him in on those passing downs. Maybe it's not, those third and long situations, maybe throw him in there because they're giving up a lot of receiving yards. And I think I saw a stat that over a third of the receiving or throwing yards that the Patriots had on Thursday's game came against those two linebackers. Over a third of those receiving yards. And it was like over 15 or 16 catches against those guys. So that is a liability, and that is a huge problem. And then I think Duke Shelley also gave up some yards, but that's to be expected because you're at your fourth, fifth string corner at this point, sixth. So, but yeah, you're not supposed to have this type of performance from two of your starting linebackers. Like this is not what you're hoping for. I guess your thoughts on Ed Ingram and Brian Asamoah to this point.
Yeah, I think Ingram is. I think he's a guy where if we could have let him sit, and develop, it would have been ideal. But at the end of the day, our offensive line wasn't very good. By the way, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Paul.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for getting in here.
But yeah,
Lids, by the way, Mall of America in Minneapolis. I don't know where Tony got his.
I got mine at the Lids in the Eagan Outlet Center.
Oh, wow. So yeah. Lids is where it's at. There you go, Paul.
Right. Shout out to Lids if you want to sponsor.
That's right. Skol Purple Podcast, gmail.com.
That's right. I'd have so many hats. But I just pay me in hats.
That's
so
there you go.
No, I would say that Ingram is he's getting a lot of experience. I think it helps that again, it helps his cause that our offensive line was so poor the last few years. Even somebody who's struggling just kind of doesn't. I mean, he does stick out like a sore thumb at times, but in general, we're kind of used to, as Vikings fans, seeing that line get pretty leaky. So I just kind of look at it like it's a year to build around for him. And, maybe he pulls a Garrett Bradbury where all of a sudden, we're down on him. And then next year he comes in and he looks amazing. So, and I'm not saying Bradbury looks amazing, but Bradbury is a new version of Bradbury. I mean, he is Bradbury 2.0, whatever new version we got. That is a season, or a serviceable center. So I just think ultimately, Carson, when I look at this draft, and I know we got some more to go through, but just something to keep in mind. I've gotten to the conclusion with Kwesi that I think right now, he is not looking for high risk, high reward talent. I think he's really looking for a lot of guys who can make the chicken nuggets, because every team needs to have a mix of stars, right? And then a mix of guys that are serviceable, but they're not going to demand big money because they are essentially in that serviceable, zone. And then you have a few that pop off, and guys that you thought would be middle tier end up being, great. That always happens, right? And then you have some that drop off. But I honestly think the way that this draft has looked, it tells me that he's looking for guys that are probably lower risk, but maybe their ceiling might be a little lower. Because that's the feeling I got. And especially looking at guys that were still on the board. I mean, you mentioned some of the picks that we essentially traded away. Those guys were, I would say, in more that high risk, high reward category, right? And I just don't think that Kwesi probably looked at our team and went, I don't know if we can do with a lot of swings and misses on home runs. Let's just try to hit a bunch of singles. And so that's what I think he's tried to do. And, when you miss, though, it makes it feel worse. So we'll just kind of see, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And again, we're not saying cut all of these guys and just forget about them, like all of these guys still have a chance to at least be solid, if not more, for the Vikings. But it's just the early returns, and especially considering this team is a competing team for a possible Super Bowl, at least for a conference championship. This is not great because imagine, like I said, if you would have just traded up for a Sauce Gardner and the impact that he's had this year for the Jets, like that is a huge deal. Like I don't think we're even selling it enough how big of a deal it would be if Sauce Gardner was in a Vikings uniform right now compared to a Jets uniform. Because even though Cam Dantzler has been good, I think if you could put him in the slot or put even Gardner or put PP in the slot, Patrick Peterson, I think that just improves your defense immensely already. Now, you could also throw in the idea of, well, could they have gotten a linebacker in the draft? I don't know if there was a linebacker there. That's something I haven't really done much research on, but even more of those three safety looks we haven't seen. Instead of you know throwing in somebody like a Kyle Hamilton, kind of in that second linebacker spot instead of a Jordan Hicks. There's just different things that the Vikings could have done, and it would have looked maybe better this year. But again, who knows? A year or two down the road, we might be having a conversation and saying, okay, this 2022 NFL draft class for the Vikings was actually not as bad as we originally thought it was. But
Right.
we could also be staying here next week, or not next week, next year or the year after, and saying, well, we were exactly right at this time. But it is interesting to take a look at. And then, the back end of the draft, Akayleb Evans. I have high hopes for Akayleb Evans. He's probably, honestly, Tony, obviously small sample size, but I think he might be the best performing of the rookies that we've had so far. And then you have Asamoah, who hasn't done much. Ty Chandler, I don't know if he's been active at all once this season. And then you have Vidarian Lowe, who's not been much, a swing backup tackle. Nick Muse, kind of a waste of a pick, at least up to this point, hasn't been on the active roster. And Jalen Naylor's been a special teamer pretty much so far this year. Any other thoughts on those draft picks that I just mentioned there, Tony?
I mean, the only one I would look out for going, in the future, not this year. I kind of have an affinity for Naylor a little bit. I think Naylor could turn into a guy that could compete for that third wide receiver position eventually. The biggest thing is just him, continuing to work hard, obviously, right? and grind in that wide receiver room. But I do like him. I liked him coming out of college. And I think on this team, he's certainly not going to compete with, Jefferson. And really at this point, I don't think he's even challenging Osborne or Thielen. But let's again think the future. Let's say if our beloved Thielen is no longer on the team, I could see him again, maybe competing for that third wide receiver position. So we'll just see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on these rookies. And some of the other rookies, like a Tariq Woolen. I can't remember when Seattle drafted him, but another guy that the Vikings could have potentially used. Jalen Rager was not. He's not a rookie, but he is a young
rookie
player.
Viking. He's a rookie Viking.
That's true. That's true. Good point. He is a rookie Viking.
Yeah.
So
well, I got what they were saying though. As far as Rager
yeah.
for that third wide receiver position, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And to the point here about the cap space continuing to be an issue in the future, this is where we need to have good draft classes. Like, you are putting so much pressure on your scouting department and on your GM to have absolutely A plus draft classes, because if you don't have these guys on rookie scale contracts, then you're going to have to go into free agency to improve your team. And if you can't spend enough money to compete with these other teams that are spending big bucks every year, then you're in trouble. Flat out, you're just in trouble. And so that's why I am definitely for, and I know there's going to probably be feedback on this, but I am definitely for axing Kirk Cousins after next year, because you're not going to be able to afford it. And I do think some of these other guys that we've talked about already, Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks of the world, some of these guys, I have a Harrison Smith jersey. I love Harrison Smith, but at the same time, you have to cut bait at some point. You have to open up your pocketbook to be able to go and get some high caliber free agents. Because let's just be honest, neither one of those guys, as much as I love Harrison Smith and Eric Kendricks for that matter, neither one of them have played that well. That's just the straight up truth. Neither one of them have played that well this season. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is. And the Vikings are going to have to make those hard business decisions. Love both of those guys. Eric Kendricks is a phenomenal dude. Great in the community, from everything I've heard, and teammates love him. But the NFL's a business. And if you aren't able to get rid of your quarterback, if you're not able to have that cap hit come down, there's going to be some hard conversations, unfortunately. And it's going to be interesting to see. However, the good news is the Minnesota Vikings are 9-2 right now, and we don't have to worry too much about it. But I'm always a future-looking person a lot of times, and too much at times as well. But I think it is always interesting to have these conversations, Tony, about looking forward to the future of these teams, especially in this case, the Vikings.
Yeah. I just think that ultimately, we'll just kind of see what happens with the Vikings and how things shake out. I'm not opposed to the Vikings certainly looking to move on from Cousins. I just think the hardest thing about that situation is Kirk Cousins is safe, right?
Yeah.
And by safe, I mean, you know what you're going to get out of him, and it's not going to be terrible. The issue is that we're still trying to tap into consistently great. And I don't know if he'll ever get there. And that's just a risk that this team is going to have to take if they want to get out of some of this cap issue that they're in. So it's just, I think ultimately it's going to depend on who they can draft and when. Because, as much as it is a business, and it's also a business for the owners to make money. and they'll look at it where, hey, if we're churning out a 2-3 win season, that's bad for business. So, does 8 wins, what does that do for us? That's kind of, I hate to say it, and I think the Wilfs do a great job. Don't get me wrong. I think the Wilfs have done a phenomenal job trying to build a winning club, and they've shown they'll pay up. They'll pay up for players that they feel like can get us there. I just think that, boy, that's a tough, we've seen it time and time again with different teams. That's a tough thing to move on from, is when you've got a guy in that quarterback spot that you can win games with. He's not terrible, but do you still want to search for, a young franchise quarterback that can get you into that Super Bowl window while they're still rookies and we can still afford a bunch of other great players? So, or at least on that rookie contract, I should say. So we'll see what happens. I just think the biggest thing is who they can draft and where and when, and kind of how they develop. But I'm with you. I'm not opposed to it. We'll just have to see come April 2023 if they want to take a quarterback to maybe sit behind Kirk for the year.